Hey, welcome back. Now we're going to go ahead and assemble a forward drum. So first I'm going to start with the Sprag just to get it out of the way, and then we'll get into the drum itself. So whenever you're rebuilding a 700R4 4L60E, you never ever want to reuse the pre-existing Sprag. You always want to replace it, and the Borg Warner Sprag 29 element is what you want to use, and that's for all 700R4s regardless of year. The early ones took a 24 element Sprag, and those were kind of prone to failure, especially if they were subjected to any kind of power at all. And the last thing you want to do is have that happen to you. If the Sprag rolls over, or if you install it backwards, the vehicle will not have any movement in drive. So for the 700R4, the Sprag is holding in drive, so the only time you'll have movement is when you shift it into manual low or manual 2. Okay, so check everything else, all your parts, make sure that they look in good shape. You want to see a good amount of cross hatching here on the inner surface of the outer race. And then for the inner race, you just want to check, make sure that it's a nice smooth mirrory surface. There's no scoring or any kind of heat damage and bluing, nothing like that. And then check over your engagement lugs, both for the inner and the outer. Just make sure that they're in good shape. So first things first, just install your retainer. And then I confess, I never can figure out like exactly in which orientation the Sprag is situated in its packaging, so it's like a 50-50 chance as to whether or not it'll be correct when I go to insert it into the outer race. So how I do all mine, just so we have like a common frame of reference, is I start out just like this on the inner race, bottom retainer, and then I'll take the outer race, and then I will try to mate them, try to insert the Sprag into the outer race by rotating this counterclockwise and the outer race clockwise. So if it feels like it wants to rotate, then I'll just keep going at it, because then I know it's in the correct orientation. But if it's just locking up solid, then I know I have it backwards. So just kind of go around and collapse any of the rollers that are kind of hanging up. I mean, the new Sprag, it'll almost seem like it won't fit, but it'll eventually go. So to double check that your orientation is correct, hold the inner race, the splines like so, and then rotate the outer race clockwise. Okay, if it rotates the other way, then you have to take it out, flip it, and then try again. You could put a little bit of fresh transmission fluid in the Sprag. I mean, it's only going to help it, but if you insert it dry like this, it's not going to hurt anything. I mean, I've never had one of these fail because lack of lubrication. All right, so the Sprag's done. Let's move on to the drum itself. So as I mentioned in the overview, we're going to be doing a 4L60E spec forward drum in terms of the 3/4. So we're going to be using some late model 4L60E parts, including the bonded steel and rubber pistons for all three apply circuits, 3/4, forward, and overrun. And then we're going to be using the 3/4 clutch pack for the 4L60E, including the 110 thousandths thick steels. Okay, and I'm gonna have to go retrieve my pressure and backing plate because I forgot to put them on the bench, but we'll get to that when the time comes. So before you do anything with the drum, and this is just something I always recommend, and I don't actually think I mentioned this when I filmed the 4L60E rebuild video, so I'll mention it now. But you want to give the drum a very thorough visual inspection. And you would think you would do this during teardown and inspection of the unit when it first came in and you're tearing it apart, but reality of it is the kind of things you're looking for may not be as easily easily spotted, because there's dirty fluid all over the place, there's grime, your hands are dirty. You really need to have the drum completely clean for this kind of second round of inspections that I'm going to have you do. So first things first, just check the body over. Make sure that there's no hairline fractures or anything like that, any kind of chipping, any damage to the drum at all. Every once in a while, one of these will come in and it'll initially look good, but when I have it cleaned up and I look at it again, then I'll see like either a small crack somewhere around here. This is where I usually see it. Or in one case recently, the drum had a giant fault line just going down, and it was like kind of shaped in a way that the dirty, nasty fluid kind of disguised it and prevented me from seeing it right away. So you want to just check that and make sure that that's not the case for your drum. You also want to carefully inspect the area inside the drum. And my lighting here is kind of crappy, but let me see if I can get a little bit more light. So you want to check the inner surface here where the 3/4 piston goes. Make sure there's no burrs and nothing that would cut the seal, or the sealing, lip seal or whatever. And then you also want to carefully inspect the bottom, all right, the bottom of the piston pocket for any kind of fractures or fissures or any sort of damage that would lead you to believe that this drum might come apart once it goes back into the vehicle. So we have a little bit of chipping right here, you'll notice. This in itself is no big deal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a small grinder and just kind of smooth that over just so that there's no rough edges. But this by itself is no issue as long as there's no corresponding fractures or fissures or anything like that. Any damage that could lead you to believe again that the drum might fail once it goes back on the road. So do the same thing here on top side. This drum looks okay. The next thing you want to check is the one-way check valve here in the snout of the input shaft and the bleeder valve here for the 3/4. You want to make sure that both of these little balls are moving around and you can hear them moving in their respective locations. So just shake the drum and listen for the sound. Okay, you should be able to see and hear movement in both of these locations. If you get a drum that's bad, and in the teardown inspection video I show you how to pressure test the drum, before you scrap the drum, pull out these two bleeder balls. The check valve for the TCC charge and the 3/4 bleed off. Because if that's all that's wrong with the drum, like for whatever reason you just can't get the bleeder hole to function like it should, then you can just replace it. All you have to do is turn this upside down and then pound it out from the inside with a drift punch and then reinstall it in the same fashion. So real cheap for you, and I believe these are sold as well separately over the counter at any Transpart supply house. If I'm wrong about that, I annotate, but I know for a fact this is available over the counter. I don't know about the 3/4 bleeder ball. All right, so the other area you want to inspect is your sealing rings. Now, I don't see this too much with the earlier stuff, but like for whatever reason, 07 and up, these sealing rings on the turbine shaft here, sometimes the grooves get pinched, and that will pinch the sealing rings, and the sealing rings will in turn start cutting grooves on the inside of the sealing surface of the stator bore and the pump. And when that starts to happen, well, you'll start getting blow-by, and you'll start either stack shifting, or you'll have slipping in forward or delayed engagements, things like that. And it's all because you didn't catch one of these grooves getting pinched or or it was pinched and you didn't notice it, and you installed a sealing ring and it went back in like that. I mean, it's pretty obvious once we go to install them. I mean, you're going to check to make sure that all the sealing rings can, you know, rotate freely in their grooves. But, you know, it's just, like I said, something to look at before you go through the whole entire, you know, effort of building up the drum, and then you get to the sealing rings and, well, they're, you know, one's getting pinched. I mean, that can be frustrating. So, let's see, this area down here, the journal itself, I'm gonna probably take a little bit of sandpaper here, clean this up, and all you're looking for is, you know, any kind of excessive scoring, and that's something that you want to do on teardown inspection. I mean, you could feel that if that's the case, if it's there, and then, you know, you would replace the drum. And I don't recommend pressing out an input shaft and pressing in a new one. I've just had too many instances where the drum would actually crack when I go to install the new shaft. And I made a repair once like that years ago, and when it went back into the vehicle, after about 2 months of driving, you know, just normal daily driving, nothing unusual, the 3/4 started to get real soft, and eventually they burnt up. So when it came back, I saw a big fracture right in here, and this was like practically, I mean, you could pull it right out of the drum. So you want to be mindful of that. All right, last thing we'll do inspection wise is check the bleeder balls in the coast clutch piston and your forward piston housing. And again, same deal. You want to make sure you're seeing and hearing the little ball move in its housing. Okay. Just shake it up and down all around. Same deal. Out of the box, these will sometimes, you know, they'll be sticky. A lot of times there'll be some cosmoline just stuck in there. Take a little bit of brake cleaner and then a little pick and just, you know, squirt it and move it around, and it should be fine. Same with this. Grit likes to get up in here. You know, fluid's not changed much, and, you know, it just finds its way into wherever. So same deal, brake cleaner and a pick, and that should straighten it out. If you can't get these either of these two balls to move in either one of these parts, then just replace them. Don't even bother. All right, we'll get the drum on the foot press, and we'll start building it up and getting it all done. All right, begin by installing your little O-ring that goes at the base of the journal here. If for whatever reason you leave this out inadvertently, you will have third gear starts. So you don't want to forget it. And then your Viton seal at the input-output shaft junction. And go ahead and lube everything up. And your 3/4 piston. And then just seat it in the bore. Next, go ahead and grab your 3/4 ply cage and stick your 3/4 clutch return spring assembly in. And then grab your forward piston housing and lube that up. So inside and outside, forward and backward. And then do the same with your forward piston. Now, if you were going to be reinstalling the aluminum pistons, there's like modification you can make to the forward piston. Offhand, I don't know exactly what it is. I think it involves grinding down some of the tabs to prevent failure. Transgo has you do it, but again, I never use them. So, all right, seat your forward piston into the housing. Sometimes they'll fight you a little bit, but most of the time they'll just go right in without the need for any, special tools. All right, if you have it, go ahead and install a seal protector. And then get your whole assembly, your 3/4 apply cage along with your forward piston and housing, and then make sure you have your return spring underneath. Line up the wide lugs on the piston with the the legs on the apply cage or apply ring, and then just carefully lower it into place. And push it all the way in. Then followed up with your overrun piston. Okay, with the bonded pistons, this typically will just drop right in without the need for a lip seal tool. But again, if you're working with the aluminum pistons, you're going to want to have a some sort of lip seal tool for these. Okay, whenever you're working with late model bonded pistons, you want to make sure you have the late model return spring assembly. It's got retainers on both sides of the spring, whereas the early just used the single-sided retainer because the overrun piston had ring bosses spring bosses for each of the springs, so it could locate them. All right. And this snap ring will sometimes want to be stubborn, like it is right now. If that's the case, just back it off and then reseat. You just want to make doubly sure that snap ring's fully in its groove before you release tension on the press. Alright, so the first clutch pack that goes in is going to be the overrun clutches. So just start with your first seal, line up the tabs with the two corresponding lugs on the case. So steel clutch, and then go ahead and grab your bearing, and then follow it up with the Sprag assembly. So then you have your overrun pressure plate. They all have a dot on both sides. It doesn't really matter which side faces up. Then next is going to be your forward clutch pack. So you're going to have your waved plate. So just have the two tabs here that are kind of wide correspond to the wide openings here on the drum. So waved, flat steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, friction. And then we'll install the snap ring and do a quick clearance check. Okay, so ideally you want your top of your pressure plate to be more or less flush with the bottom of the snap ring groove. Okay, that's how you know that you're going to be where you need to be when it comes to clutch clearance. I think spec on these is something like 30 to 50 thousandths. This is what we call a non-working clutch or a static clutch. So you can run it a little tight and it's not going to hurt anything. You don't want to be too tight because then you're going to drag in reverse and neutral. And if it's too tight, like as in zero clearance, you're going to be moving forward in neutral. So just make sure that like the frictions themselves move freely underneath the snap ring. The clutch pack's not bound up. And then you can use some feeler gauges to check. So we'll do something like 41 thousandths worth of gauges. And you just check in multiple spots. Okay, 41 thous, feeling a little tight. So we'll try something like, let's see, we'll do something like 35 thousandths. And that feels good. I mean, it goes right in. In fact, 35 thous, not thick enough. So I know in between 35 and 40 thousandths, that's perfect. Okay. I'll do the 3/4 clutch pack. Now it should be noted that the 700 R4s, you're gonna have a backing plate, almost like a very thin cage-like structure, and then you're going to have a selective apply plate or pressure plate, and that is used in conjunction with different thickness snap rings to arrive at clutch clearance. And of course you can mix and match different thickness of steels. The 4L60E changed that. They went to just a one-piece backing plate and then 110 thousandths thick on the steel plates. So we'll see where we're at, and if we need to make adjustments, we can swap in and out different things and go from there. But in an ideal world, I prefer between 40 and 55 thousandths worth of clearance in this clutch. I'll tolerate 60, but if it's more than 60, then I'm looking for either thicker frictions or thinner frictions, but more of them. And these pressure plates, I've noticed, can also be selective. And I say that, I mean, we're not talking a huge difference, but I've seen as much as like 7 to 8 thousandths, somewhere in there, variance between, different pressure plates for the 3/4. Okay, so if you feel this, if you can see this, I'm feeling, you obviously can't feel it, but this is like perfect. And we'll measure clearances just for the sake of the video, but like if I was assembling this and not filming it, then I would be perfectly good with this. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put the drum back on the bench and we'll install the sealing rings on the turbine shaft. Alright, now we'll go ahead and install the sealing rings on the input shaft or turbine shaft. I mean, I use the term interchangeably. It's two different words for the same thing. So this is one of the areas in the 700R4 4L60E where you may need special tools, and I say you may. It depends on, combination of things, how handy you are, and what you have available. But essentially, how I install these is I first expand them here on this little expander, and then I'll resize them using the sizer tool. As far as substitutes, you can expand these, you know, just manually with like a 45-degree angle pick. You just want to make sure you don't cut them. It's going to take you a little bit longer because you do have to be more careful, but you can do it. And then as far as sizing them down, you can use a combination of hose clamps and the you know, the stator, the whole pump assembly. You just carefully lower it onto it until it seats over the sealing ring, and then just let it sit there for a few minutes, and then, you know, pull it back off. But it can be done. I've done it before, even before I had these tools. It's just, like I said, it takes a little bit longer to do. So all you want to do is just go through and expand each of your rings. This particular tool is actually used for a 4L80E's input shaft sealing rings. That transmission takes 2 different size sealing rings, so you got, you know, 2 different size expanders. Okay, once you have each ring expanded, just go ahead and carefully work it over the each of the grooves. You know, careful not to, you know, pinch or damage it in any way. I mean, if a tiny little bit gets shaved off, that's not going to be the end of the world. But, you know, if you slice a pretty sizable chunk of it off, then you'll want to replace that ring. And if you're working on one of these for the first time, you know, or you're set to work on one or build one, you know, maybe it's one of yours or a friend's or whatever, I would suggest that you buy an additional sealing ring kit over and above the paper and rubber kit that comes with everything that, you know, you're going to purchase to rebuild the transmission. And reason I say that is because it is easy to, you know, break one of these or break one of the stator Teflon rings. So you just way you have extras and you don't run into any kind of delays with your project. So do what you can to kind of size the ring down by hand, and then drop your sizer over it, seat it, and withdraw it. Now if you want, you can put a little assembly lube on the sizing tool. Kind of also prevents or helps prevent the ring getting caught up, or, you know, any damage happening to it as you're working it over. So as you can see, a little piece of the sealing ring got cut. You just want to be careful that it's not any more than that. So it's just a matter of striking a balance between, you know, how much you expand the ring to get it over each of these ring lands versus, you know, having it expand too much and then you can't size it back down. And then when you're withdrawing the sizer, just try to lift straight up on it. You don't want it to cock too far sideways, because that's also a good way to potentially damage one of these sealing rings. Again, you don't want to force the sizer on. Even if you have to go at it, sneak up on it, you know, 5 or 6 times until you can get it all the way seated down in the, you know, in the ring sized into its bore. I mean, that's fine. But as far as, like, you know, quote unquote delicate operations go for these transmissions, this is arguably the, you know, the trickiest, or at least where you're most likely to break something. I mean, assembling the case is pretty straightforward, and bushings are fairly simple. I mean, I don't want to say they're 100% foolproof as we've seen, but it's going to be rare that you're going to have any kind of problems like what I had with that extension housing. I think I've seen that maybe once or twice before, and I've been doing this for over 10 years. Okay. I like to go through, put a little assembly lube on the sizer and then resize it for one last time. And then just double check, make sure that each of them spins freely in their respective locations. If any of them are bound up, you need to figure out why, so that you can fix that. Every once in a while you'll have like a little burr on either the underside or the top side of the ringland, and a very small file or something like that can usually address it, or even like one of those wafer pads. So it happens. All right, so here's your selective spacer washer for your front thrust. This is what sets your forward end play. So these are numbered from, I believe, 65 or 66, and they go up to, I want to say 75 or 76. Don't quote me on that, but that's going to be, broadly speaking, the range of sizes and numbers you're going to be dealing with. The higher the number, the thicker the washer, and they're on average about between 7 and 8 thousandths, increments. So if you have a 68, it's going to be about maybe 7 to 8 thousandths thicker than a 67. And likewise thinner relative to a number 69. So just put it down, number faces down, and then your thrust bearing, and then don't forget your torque converter clutch O-ring on the very tip of the input shaft, and that's basically it. So the drum's done, and to show you that one area where it was a little messed up, it's right here. So stuff like that's no big deal. This is what I call a non-load bearing surface down there. The main thing is you don't want to see any kind of fissures, any fault lines, anything like that. So all right, we got all the sub-assemblies done, so now it's time to do some air checks and measure our clearances for the reverse input and for the 3/4 clutch pack in here. You don't measure the overrun clearance. It is what it is. I'll have to annotate the video, but I'm not sure what the spec is, but it's not something that you really ever have to worry about. Just put the 2 clutches and the 2 steels in, steel clutch, and then, drop your Sprag and your, pressure plate, along with that bearing, and that's it for that. All right, let's go ahead and set everything up for our air checks and our clearance measurements, and then we'll be ready to begin case reassembly once we're done with that. All right, now it's time to do some air checks. So want to make sure that the clutches will apply when fluid is introduced, so the air is really a proxy of fluid. So we'll go ahead and introduce some air, and then we'll see A, whether the clutch will apply or not, and B, what kind of clearance we have in the clutch pack. So we'll start with the reverse input, and then we'll move to the forward drum. Okay, so it looks like we're getting about 65 thousandths. We'll be a little bit closer. Okay, so when you put air into the reverse drum, you're going to hear a lot of air coming out, and that's just simply because this drum is designed to bleed air efficiently. It's never on unless you're in reverse. So if you're in forward gears, 1, 2, 3, 4, especially at higher RPM, the last thing you want is this thing to centrifugally apply. So In high performance applications, I try to set the clearance on the high side of spec. This is not technically high performance, but at 65 to 70 thousandths is actually where I like it, so that if we have, transmissions seeing 5,000 plus RPMs, then we don't have to worry about any issues with the high reverse drum or reverse input drum. All right, I'm going to take this away and then we'll do the forward clutch drum. All right, now we have the forward drum set up, so we're going to do some air checks. I'm going to check both the forwards, coast clutch, as well as the 3/4. However, we're only going to measure the clearance for the 3/4. So that's the reverse input again. There's our 3/4. So it looks like we're right at 60 thousandths. Let me zoom in. We'll hit it again. Yeah, about 60 thou. On a stock build, 60 thousandths is fine. It's really the max that I'll tolerate though. Like I said, I really try to be 50 or less with the 3/4s. For performance, we would have to tighten this up. So if you're going to do the forward, you need to plug this little port right down here on the pump. Zoom in so you know what I'm talking about. So you need to put a finger or thumb on the transfer pipe port so that you can air check the forwards. Okay, and then we'll do it again, only this time we'll do the coast clutch. So coast clutch, forwards, 3/4, reverse input. Okay, everything applies like it should. No issues. So now we're pretty much ready to put everything into the barrel of the case.